Welcome to Transmissions, where for 6 years we've talked about all toys, comics, and media related to
Transformers!
Happy holidays and welcome to Transmissions. This is a special clip show that has some of our favorite moments from the last 6 years of doing the podcast. Some of these have been suggested by people that entered our 6-year anniversary contest, and some of these we just picked out ourselves because we like them so much. So we hope everyone enjoys listening to this, and we will see you in the new year.
Hey everybody, this is the first clip that we've got here is from one of our declassified episodes that we did back in August 31st of 2018. That's when we released it. And the episode in question is, well, let's just say it went on for a while. With the declassifieds, we tried to keep them to about an hour. And this one went on for 2 hours and 41 minutes. This was an epic declassified episode. And the guests for it were Chris Vangelis and Steven Echo Transformer. And this one was about fixing and modding and maintaining your collectibles. And we had a really good discussion on this one. So yeah, take a listen here and enjoy. I'm going to move us right along into some really easy DIY fixes. So these are the ones that if you've bought a figure and you're not really super confident in what your abilities are, these are things that you should be able to do because really they're where you start. That's where everybody starts. All right. So right off the top, repro labels. Really simple, really easy. It's a new set of stickers. You want to get some your figure to look a little different, a little better, a little jazzed up. We're gonna get some repro labels and we're gonna sticker some stuff up. They do a really good job. They are a sponsor of the Transmissions podcast right now, giving away $10 gift codes on every month. It's been really great having them. So repro labels, they're great.
I'll just throw in there for repro labels. Tools you'll want for those: some tweezers, like very fine tweezers, which I believe they might sell on the site still. If you're really in a pinch, tweezers are really helpful. Also, I use like an X-Acto tip, like the tip of an X-Acto knife. Like basically, small, thin, precise tools are how you want to apply, like especially smaller labels. A lot of repro labels are not really designed with the idea that you're using your fingers to apply them, and also it's just harder. Mm-hmm. So it's worth investing in at least using a hobby knife edge to apply the labels. Very carefully if you're using a hobby knife. But using your fingers should be the absolute last resort for repro labels.
That's a really good point. And just one other thing to keep in mind, even as a beginner applying repro labels, is just make sure that the part's pretty clean that you're about to apply to. I mean, there's definitely this scenario where we talked about before where you're restoring a G1 or something like that. But there's also a scenario where the thing's brand new, but you've had your hands all over it. And it's amazing how much oil is coming off in your hands onto the toy. And sure, maybe the label goes on okay today, but tomorrow and the next week and a couple months later, is that thing peeling off? A lot of times that's happened because there's some, contamination on underneath. Yeah, exactly. So keep it clean.
And wash your hands with soap before you start, just as a precaution. And you don't have to worry about what you're handling. And I'm more into that than wearing gloves. I've tried wearing gloves to do labels or other modding work, and it's from person to person. I need to feel what I'm holding, or there's too much of a tactile disconnect for me. But if you're able to deal with gloves, that's also an option, But yeah, repro labels are pretty darn solid.
All right. We touched on it before. Loose joints and fixing it with floor polish, pretty simple stuff. Like we were saying before, don't start with your $200 masterpiece figure. Start with the figure you can pick up at a garage sale that's really a piece of junk. Just, try something easy on that.
Yeah, something with lots of ball joints helps, and something from a garage sale that's old and real jiggly. Mm-hmm. Those are the two things to test stuff out on.
Mars converters.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if anybody's going to get that reference, but Yeah.
Kit bashing. Steven, you want to tell us about this?
Sure. I mean, really, that's just taking two of the same figure. One's half broken one way, the other's half broken the other, and together you're creating a complete figure. And I think some people might feel like that's not genuine doing that. So I think at the entry level, just having the complete figure that you've not had in your collection is nice. But if you want to be a little more sensitive to it, you can consider making sure, like, for example, if the one G1 figure had a die cast variant and the other one is a plastic variant, that you're maybe not mix and matching those contents. Like, you'd have one die cast foot and the other is a plastic foot. That's not preserving as much of the integrity. The only other thing just to mention on kit bashing is there's a clever side angle to it, which is, in some cases, molded components are shared across toys, and some of the internal components can be fair game in allowing you to restore a figure. So when you're thinking about kit bashing, maybe you're looking for the exact toy that's broken or that you're trying to restore. But could there be another variant of that toy or that mold or a different color that provides you the internal component or a component that's not as obvious? Or if you're getting into a little more of the intermediate level, one that you could paint to match. If it gets that super rare, super important piece restored in your collection, kit bashing can be an amazing solution. And then you don't have to get into all the cutting and grinding and pins and things that require a little more fabrication.
And it might also be worth mentioning, like, it's not as common now, but sometimes there are even like knockoffs where certain components of those knockoffs are durable enough that they can be Frankensteined in if you just want to have a working toy. I have some experience kit bashing GoBots because GoBots and Old Machine Robo, I think because of their size and the nature of their durability, a lot of them that made it through kids' pockets from the 80s are in, shambles now. But a lot of GoBot Machine Robo toys are also held together with about 2 screws. Mm-hmm. And Frankensteining those things together, you can get the parts. You can get Junker GoBots like candy at conventions. I try to sell all of my Junker parts, and please buy more of them. Thank you. But I have taken like 3 copies of Turbo, for instance, and just like shredded them apart and put together a fairly nice looking Turbo. And it is an empowering feeling to do that. Let me tell you. Like, it feels like you have taken control of that toy. Granted, one of them was my childhood Turbo, so I had to convince myself that, I don't know, like, its toy spirit was in the finished new one. I was like, yeah, that left leg component is where the heart is, and that's from mine. But, yeah, like, it doesn't even have to be a Transformers, but like even a simpler toy line. If you just want to try it, get a couple Junker GoBots of the same GoBot and try to identify ones where between, say, all 4 copies, you've got a good one, and just have a go at it. It can be really fun.
My entire job at the local comic book store is kit bashing their Transformers. I have to take all of the stuff they have and just put together complete ones or the completest ones. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Moving on. We've got modding like clipping pins, like we were just talking about. Adding and removing spring tension. So we just we've got that point you guys were talking about earlier. Springs are interesting because not many toys have them nowadays. A lot of older ones did. In my big boy job, I use a specialized tool called a spring hook, which is nothing more than a long, thin piece of metal with a little hook on the end, and it's used for reaching into a hard to reach spot and hooking onto a spring and being able to pull it off of its housing and remove it without losing it, because these springs are very small. If you'd like to recreate one of these, it's not difficult. You can use, like, I would suggest a large paper clip, unbend it all the way, and just put use your newly bought needle nose pliers and put a small hook in the end, and you've made yourself a spring hook. It's a very, very useful tool for getting springs and unhooking them from the spots that they're hooked into on toys. It's really, really useful.
And nothing feels worse than dropping a tiny spring and hearing the noise of it bouncing. That's a terrible feeling. So something that can actually hold on to the spring is huge. I want to throw out there a lot of third-party toys with over tight, basically too powerful a spring. They're common fix now, which I think people are getting used to. It's kind of a risky fix, but it's for third-party toys, the nature of springs that are simply just too big is sometimes people will just cut one revolution off the spring. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that just works fine. One of the Fans Project Monstructor guys, or Dino King guys, the one who turns into the upper chest classic. I think I shot a video with ages 3 and up about it, of like, basically the springs they used were way too powerful and were busting the entire ratchet mechanism in the legs. And the very easy fix, because of it was easy to open the toy up and just get the spring out, was to cut one revolution or a half revolution off the spring. I wouldn't say just go to that as your default, because you are cutting a spring, which is not like the world's easiest thing to do. And that might really mess with some of the calculated tensions. But in the case of, say, something where the spring is tight, but the gears are snagging, like on Masterpiece Dinobot, that's where a lubricant can come into play. Also, if you have a Transformers toy, take a look at where the screws are. Sometimes tight joints or loose joints can be fixed with, like, as simple as the quarter turn of a screw. Where I'll also throw in there, a JIS screwdriver can be a wonderful thing to get a hold of. You can get them on Hobbylink Japan for super cheap. That's where I got a couple of mine. And it's like a Phillips head, but it's not tapering on the end. It's flat on the end. That is what a lot of toy screws actually are JIS screws. And so a JIS screwdriver can just save you a lot of trouble getting, the tip of your screwdriver to bite into the screws. Surely a lot of people have run into it with a Phillips head where it's like, it works, but I have to push in to get it to bite in properly. A JIS screwdriver often will save you that. And the ones on HLJ are also magnetic, which is very helpful. So that's just one thing really worth throwing out there. I tried to find a JIS screwdriver at Canadian Tire. There was I found one, but it was in a kit with 20 other screwdrivers, and I didn't want 19 other screwdrivers at the time. So it was easier for me to import it. But JIS is the key word for that screwdriver.
Great. All right. And some last ones here, just to real easy to do. You can boil water to reduce stress marks. Also, I've heard the old, use a hair dryer to warm it up as well.
Be careful with a hair dryer, though, because boiling water in hair dryers is also a way to fix bent PVC parts. Because if you heat them up, they'll return to their original shape.
Right.
I highly recommend boiling water over hair dryers, because with boiling water, you have 100% control over what is getting the heat applied to it.
Sure.
With a hair dryer, I just seen it happen where I think it was first edition Bulkhead. Someone was trying to use a hair dryer to fix some of the soft plastic parts, and they caught some of the ABS parts in the hair dryer as well, heated them up too much, and the ABS just kind of went slack and started to warp really badly.
Right.
So boiling water it's a lot more controlled. If you have a heat gun, I believe that can be more controlled too, but
but a heat gun can be even hotter.
Yeah.
I was just going to jump in. You're bang on to say boiling water over a hair dryer. And I'll see that on forums, and someone will say, grab a hair dryer. And I just no, grab the boiling water. And it really is counterintuitive, to boil this water. And you boil it, honestly, you boil it to the full boiling point. I have a kettle, and I bring it right up to a full boil, and I pour it as quickly after it reaches the full boil onto the part. And you think, oh my gosh, this is going to bend the part or warp the part. It just does. It's just not quite going to reach that melting point of the ABS. It just reaches close to the plastic point. The stress marks disappear. I think there's a bit of a jury convening on whether that has actually improved the structural integrity of their part or just gotten rid of the stress marks. I actually believe some structural integrity is restored in doing this, but regardless, it just works. And so
a
right,
hair
Chris.
dryer, a hair dryer is, you are blasting it with a continuous heat source. Boiling water, if you're pouring it over to reduce the stress marks, it's going to run off. It's not going to sit there,
right,
pushing heat into the plastic. And if you're using boiling water, for PVC parts, I put the boiling water into a cup so I can just dunk the PVC part specifically into it. And that way I can let it, as long as I'm holding, I can let it sit in there as long as I need to, and it will, reshape itself to some degree. And then you use cold water to reset the soft plastic part. But it's all about control, the hair dryers are just so like, they're violent tools.
Didn't the boiling water trick though? Didn't that cause a lot of issues with the Titan class Trypticon and the front clear piece on it?
Well, there was a whole thing where that was a whole story, I think, where a lot of people, some of them I think were warped, but I think a lot of people thought they all were warped if they weren't fitting, and then it turned out that it was more so there were a number of internal assemblies that needed to be tightened up.
Oh.
And so there, this is me paraphrasing. I'm half-heartedly recalling this, but like, I believe it was more a case people trying to use stuff like a hair dryer to reshape a clear plastic plank, or boiling water to reshape the clear plastic plank, and it was like, I don't know, I would not have felt good about doing that on a very base level. Like, it just kind of, I don't know. I was really happy that it turned out to mostly just be like having to tighten up the sandwiching of parts around it. All
right.
Yeah, this is it. I think that the key is when you're playing with, like, stress marks is a very localized fix in a very small area in theory where you're targeting. But if you've got warping, and it's interesting because this happens too, and you guys were talking about like the PVC and the rubbery parts, like maybe you've had your figures in a plastic bin, a tote or something over some period of time, and then you pull them out and maybe one of your Beast Wars legs is kind of going off in a weird direction. The hot water can actually take that out, but you're doing a larger fix. And then when you start to get to larger planar surfaces, that's where it gets really dodgy, because how are you going to ensure that thing is flat? Like, unless you have a jig or something fancy, like, just, I wouldn't do it, like there's probably a better way.
And also, like, hard clear plastic is a very different material than softer durometer PVC stuff.
Right.
Because the softer stuff has a memory aspect that boiling water's heat can reactivate safely. But like, if it's like, the clear plastic hard plank on Trypticon's chest, I don't feel good about using heat to rewarp that just as like the immediate initial idea. Like, it just seems really freaky to me because I just see a lot more going wrong with that. There's a certain, like, once you do a lot of like figure tweaking, you kind of get used to like some plastics it's safer to do X, Y, and Z, and like, some plastics you don't want to do X, Y, and Z unless someone else has done it and said it's safe to do.
Right.
Like, check feedback threads a lot. There are a lot of very industrious minded toy modders who they do a lot of work. Like Masterpiece Movie Optimus Prime, there was one dude who did so much work, not just in like fixing it, but even more so explaining and deducing why that figure's problems were happening. And I thought it was incredible, the work that guy did. Like, it answered so many mysteries that had been falling into the catch-all of like bad QC. And it's like, well, here's specifically what happened, right down to packaging the toy in a certain mode with tight twist ties on it. It was fascinating. But yeah, I'm getting off topic.
All right, we've also got scratch remover to be used when fixing window scratches. I never heard of that, so that makes sense. It can also be used to fix minor paint scuffs and to even brighten up plastic. That's pretty cool. Steven, you've done this?
Yeah, I'm excited about this one. I don't think it's as well known, so I'm always trying to spread the word. So what you do is you go to the automotive section in your big box store. You probably can find this stuff online too. And I'm trying to remember the name of the stuff. It's like Scratch X or something is the one that I've been using, or New Bright. There's a few like this. And what it is actually stuff designed for your car, for your full scale car, that's intended to take out minor scratches, usually in the clear coat of the paint. The interesting thing is this stuff has like a very, very fine polishing compound in it, and then like a liquid to help allow that to flow over the part as you're working it. So what you do is I typically just put like a little bit on a paper towel, and then a very, very tiny amount. I mean, this is like what Chris was saying earlier about the oil. You have to, a little bit is all you need. And then you literally just glaze over the affected area, very, very small amount, very, very light pressure, and just glaze it. And then you let it dry. And then you go back over with a fresh part of the paper towel and literally polish it out. And it's just remarkable. I'm telling you, I've had some, you know how like the clear part of windows, especially on some stuff that's been at the bottom of the bin for a while, it gets really scuffed up. I've had some vintage figures where you could literally, it's like the character inside could not see out that windshield. I've literally got it back to almost factory mold status with this process. So it works really well. It's a lot of elbow grease to get there, by the way. That's not going to happen in one sitting. You're going to have to do several to get it right. I don't know if you guys, have you guys ever heard of Starcom?
Yes.
I've got a big Starcom collection, and there was a few pieces that were just really hard to find. And all those vehicles have canopies, and they're really beautiful canopies. And I had one that was just ridiculously scuffed, and got that up to a nice, clear, easy to see finish. Now, in addition to the Windows stuff, the clear stuff, a couple of things to be aware of. You want to be a little bit careful if the canopy or window or what have you does have paint around the perimeter, because this stuff will impact paint. It'll start to work paint away, but it does it in a fairly slow way. So we were talking earlier about alcohol and how alcohol can, fairly quickly strip off paint and you're in tears. This stuff's a little slower, but, for example, once in a while I'll brush off, let's say it was, alternator swerve, right? And, I actually had one where, there was scratches on the main windshield, alternator swerve's Corvette, right? And then on the top, the hood, sorry, not the hood, the roof, which is actually painted red on that, figure. So there was some deep scratches there. And to me, when I first got this thing, it looked like those scratches were down to the plastic. But for some reason, maybe they were, maybe they weren't. I don't know. It's just like it flowed that paint together, and I could get the scratches out entirely. So it was a great restoration. In addition, it will help with scratches on plastics. So another thing that happens a lot with bottom of the bin stuff is it'll literally just be covered in scratches, and it just looks old. And maybe even the color is okay. It's not necessarily gone yellow or what have you, but it's amazing what all those micro scratches do just to make the thing look crappy. So again, this same technique works really well. Again, you need to avoid labels, paint, that kind of stuff. But a really good polishing with this stuff can make a huge difference. The only downside I've had to this is that, again, the scratch remover is like some kind of very fine grit suspended in it's literally like a white, like paste kind of thing, right? It tends to kind of get in some crevices and nooks and crannies on the toy. And then you've got to figure out how to get that out. So I'll often have like a toothpick or some other things nearby to just work the remaining little bits of the white stuff out. It dries. It's harmless when it dries, but it just looks kind of funny when it's sitting in there. It's sort of like a car that's been waxed and you missed a few places. Yeah. It looks like that.
I would actually just throw out there quickly for hardware. Q-tips and toothpicks are very helpful and really worth having in your kit, just in general.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So, I didn't know if this was a well-known one, but it's done worlds for me.
It's completely news to me. It's fantastic.
I've already added it to the show notes. Scratch X 2.0 is what I found. So yeah.
I think that's the one I've been using. Yeah.
Cool.
Yes. Yeah.
That's wicked. Yeah, no, I'm going to be picking some of that up because I've got a couple old G1s and they're not looking the greatest, but simply because it's some scratches on them. So yeah, no, I'll be doing that. And the last one on here on this list is rubbing alcohol, which we touched on earlier. It is a great cleaner. Be careful only on paint-free plastic. So yeah. Move on to I didn't put anything in this category. I thought we could have a quick little discussion on it. Common issues caused by collectors. So we've talked a lot about stuff that comes, the figures come like this, but what are some of the things that you've done or you've seen done by collectors that need fixing?
Some people treat ratchet joints like they're on an industrial machine, and like at some point I kind of want to go like, it's still a toy, and just because it's ratcheting, you shouldn't like yank it, my man. And this isn't some kind of subtweet thing. Like, it's just something I've noticed like at some conventions. Because like ratchet joints, I do it sometimes. They kind of give you the sense of confidence, and like, I don't know, sometimes you see like people messing with like a Fans Toys piece or something, and they're just like one leg in one fist, the torso in the other fist, just like moving the leg up and down. And it's like, you know, I would highly recommend fingertips when you're moving joints. And also, like, if it's an expensive toy, like, get a tactile sense for like knowing like, all right, I'm just going to try to apply just enough to move this joint and then see how it feels. And often joints will feel good or feel maybe more brittle. And I don't know, just like sometimes broken, especially third-party toys, sometimes the brakes on those, having done them myself because I wasn't paying enough attention or just I got too caught up in the ratchet joint. It's kind of like, we got to remember ratchet joints aren't indestructible here, and the stuff around them is not indestructible.
That's true.
That's the main one I could think of.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That and like if you have a toy with like rubber horns and you put it head first into a bin, and then you wonder why they're all bent. That's happened to me several times.
Well, and just to add to what you were saying about the joints there, Chris, something that I'm trying to remind myself as I enjoy this stuff is where you grab things. So it could be a ratchet joint, it could be anything during the transformation. And I know that, for the hobby, in the end, it's just toys and whatnot, but there's a lot of engineering going on here. And I keep thinking about torque. So the further you grab away from thy joint, the more torque you are applying on thus joint, and therefore potentially over torquing or putting undue stress on any of the components in between where you're grabbing and where the actual joint is, whatever that is. And, they've gotten so sophisticated, especially over the last few years, really pushing the boundaries on what we're transforming. It's becoming harder and harder even to know where to grab. And I find it really helpful. There's a lot of really good reviewers, yourself included, Chris, and guys like MGO. Like I watch where they grab as they're doing these transformations, and they're just so good at it. They're just really good at finding those places to put undue stress. So, it's maybe not a super conscious thing that's always on our minds, but just to bring it out to the community, there's almost an art in that. Like now I want to watch a Chill Formations after this because I know.
Well, I think it's a big part of it is like training yourself to know when you are feeling a bad resistance. Because it's kind of like it's stepped warnings. It's like, do I feel a bad resistance? Okay, where are my fingers? Are they too far apart? All right, I'll go closer and just hold right by where the movement is happening. Is the bad tension still happening when I'm holding closer to there? Like, it's having a tactile awareness of what you're messing with is a really good thing to train yourself for, especially if you are getting into higher end toys where it can be argued they should just be built better or something. And it's like, for sure. But sometimes a transformation idea requires something that also requires a little bit of finesse in its execution on the user end, which is where videos are huge. And I'll just briefly drag out my little soapbox. A toy that costs over $150 converted should have video instructions. And they should not be made by the community. Those should have been made on the production side. With audio so that you know what the toy sounds like, because that's another huge thing. The Masterpiece, Sunstreaker, and Megatron have parts of their transformations where if you don't know that it's supposed to make that loud snapping noise or that you can feel it building up to that loud snapping noise, you don't know if you're about to break it or not. And it's ridiculous that you're just given a bunch of sequential images to work with on a thing that is like 22,000 yen, for instance. But I'll put the soapbox back under the table now.
Oh, that's such a good point. We have the technology, right? QR code, good to go.
I got so mad. I'm going to dragging it back up for a second. Bandai made this really good, like the newest Valkyrie design, the VF31, probably the best Macross toy Bandai's ever made. And they made an instructional video to go with it. Clearly shot on a cell phone in the office. That's fine. It was also clearly shot with the cell phone being held vertically and they added borders to the sides. That's fine. they also put a lousy looping techno track over the whole thing so you couldn't hear the toy. And much like Masterpiece Megatron, that toy, there are parts of its transformation where you need to hear what's going on to know you're not breaking it. And it's just such a base thing. Like the more fancy transformations get, and that is not a bad thing inherently, the more that you need not just the tactile feedback to be explained, but the audio feedback too. It's huge. Like, thank you to everyone who makes detailed transformation videos. Thank you, for instance, to Wotafa, who covers a lot of high-end Japanese stuff as it comes out in Japan, and goes through transformations in a way that is like, y'all at Bandai could have done that in your office. And you tried, and you almost did it, and you made the single dumbest mistake. But I'm putting the soapbox back into the table.
So here's kind of another one that can happen, and I don't know who's to blame in this case, the collector or the manufacturer. But just because it can transform doesn't mean it will transform. What do I mean by this? Once in a while, you're going to get a stuck joint. I think this tends to happen maybe more with the vintage stuff. And I might have covered this later, or had this in the notes for later, but we could just skip to it now. And that is, certain joints will actually seize. It does happen. And then I think, Chris, you had alluded to it earlier. Sometimes things are just over tightened, from the factory. I mean, assembling these, there's so many steps. It's challenging. The factory doesn't always get it perfect. And yes, they should have QC, and yes, they should get better, but you know what? Once in a while it happens. So there's this point where, you've got the thing in hand and you're about to do the transformation and it's stuck. And what do? Okay, you go to the video. Oh, this should work. You're still pushing. It's still not working. What do you do? I think it's really important once in a while just to take a pause and look at it and compare side to side, look for evidence of maybe what's going on. The thing that I've been bailing myself out more and more with is backing off a screw here and there. Even on some of the vintage stuff, I've even gone so far as to heat up something that has seized, especially for the vintage stuff, because again, that seizing can actually happen through just the settling of plastic, which, plastic feels pretty stable in our hands, but over time it actually does continue to flow, and they call it creep. So basically, it's sort of like it's building on what you were saying earlier, Chris. Like, if you're starting to feel that resistance, that's telling you something.
Yeah.
And even if it's really supposed to turn that way and it's not, it's still telling you something. There's something in the way. There's a burr, there's this, there's that, who knows? And unfortunately, you got to investigate. Or, of course, with again, what I think is pretty good support we get from our resellers and stuff, contact your reseller. You say, look, this is seized. What do I do? And 9 times out of 10, those guys are pretty good. They'll give you good advice.
When I've had a mechanical failure, I've even just shot a quick cell phone video just to show them what's going on and explain, calmly in the video, like, hey, this part's not moving, etc. And I'll attach it to the email. And usually a reseller, especially if you're in the States, you guys have such a plethora of well-known sellers who all are vying to have a good reputation, basically. You don't have to mod figures if you know you can also get a return. It's just sometimes modding can save you that trouble. And I would throw in there, I understand how it feels to get stubborn when a thing is supposed to do a thing and it's not. And I've had so much more success focusing that stubbornness into trying to modify the toy than trying to just make the mechanism work. If you be stubborn, but be stubborn in that, all right, I'm getting out my screwdriver and I'm going to open this thing up and see what's going on. And sometimes even I've opened a thing up and I saw an internal mechanism. They missed the hole on this thing that has 2 pegs sticking out each side. And one of those pegs is unseated. I'll just reseat it. Then it works. Be stubborn, but don't be stubborn in the sense of just pushing it harder. Like, I've seen threads on TFW. Every now and then there's a reply where someone's like, oh, it broke because I got frustrated and I just pushed it really hard and the leg broke off. And I'm kind of sitting there going this is just validation though, right? Like, you're not saying that hoping that we're going to take up arms against the actual toy because you got mad. I've gotten mad, and sometimes people just don't up to it, but put that stubbornness into your tools and you'll find a lot more success, I find.
This next clip is from a early episode. This is back in 2015 where Jeremy and I went to TFCon Charlotte. And at TFCon Charlotte, we had the opportunity to meet Greg Berger, the voice of Grimlock, Skyfire, and a bunch of other characters on Transformers. Just an awesome voice actor in general. And he was nice enough to give us an exclusive interview that we were able to do at TFCon Toronto. He actually came to our hotel room and sat with us for about an hour. It was really cool. This was something that I never expected we'd be able to do, is to get to have that much time with such an awesome actor like Greg Berger. So this is a very cool discussion with Grimlock himself. If you get the chance to meet Mr. Berger, he's an awesome guy. He's really loves to interact with the fans, and he'll be at TFCon Orlando this March. So if you have the chance, go say hi. But here's our discussion with Greg Berger.
You mentioned some of the range you did as when you were doing the stage play. And that's something we've also noticed with the voice acting as well. I mean, last night.
Well, I am Squeak the Mouse on the Garfield Show, and Odie. Wow.
You're rendering me speechless.
And then last night in the voice acting panel, you were also long haul. And...
Yeah, well, I didn't join this outfit to be no dump truck, I'll tell you that. remove. It's enough already.
Yeah, and also Skyfire, the giant plane. I didn't even, as a kid, I didn't know these were all voiced by the same person. How do you achieve such a range like that?
I'm drawn to voice-driven characters as an audience and as an actor. And if I dive inside of a character that I'm doing, and I'm also a teacher, and I'm a big proponent when I teach of the fact that they're never really casting voices. Voices are technically created. They're casting characters. And if you don't do the homework to perceive a character that you're playing in 3 dimensions, then it's doesn't matter how unique or interesting or gimmicky a voice is. You know, this is voice acting, but the capitalized letters are the second word. If the acting is true, and if you find the truth of a character, the voice will follow. And if you're fortunate enough to be a multi-voice like I am, and you actually run the risk of forgetting which character sounds like what, as long as you know which character you're jumping into, the rest will always ring true if you do the homework. It's not just about making funny voices. In fact, it's not really about making funny voices. It's about creating characters. But enough about me.
No,
but what do I know?
We're here to talk all about you. So.
Oh, okay. It really is about me.
So, what was it like to work on the Transformers cartoon back in the 80s? I get the sense that it was not something that was you thought it was going to be a huge 30 years later. It was something that was going to have such longevity.
Well, there's actually, there's a bigger question. Of course, it was fantastic to actually, as an actor, what you want to connect, you want to be appreciated, and you want to be understood, and you want work. So there's that initial rush because you got the job. But then when you find out that you're going to be part of a series, you're going to have a character that's going to go through twists and changes. And every time you get a new script, you're filtering that through the character that you're already building. And again, the writers and artists are helping you continue to build because you're in a series situation. Now this character is going to have a life over time. And you get to put all those pieces in and sort of grab each new script as it comes in to find out where you're going this episode and what changes you're going through. So that part's all thrilling. There's another thing that it leads to, because when I teach, I now am able to look students in the eye and tell them that I encourage you to do everything you do today as though someone might fondly remember it decades from now, a couple of decades from now. Because I'm the beneficiary of that philosophy, that wisdom, you know. And I don't do anything unless I'm going to do it fully, but it allows me to encourage them to bring their A game every time. If you're too tired, nobody cares. If you're a little under the weather, nobody cares. Just do what you came to do and treat it as though it might have a life after the day you do it. I've had the great good fortune of being around the world because of the work I do. A lot of the generation that grew up on these shows now comprises convention generation and their kids, and in a couple of cases, grandkids. It's extraordinary. And Transformers, although we knew Wally was a firm taskmaster, and Wally Burr had a very strong sense of the show, and Flint Dilley and all of the people writing, story editing, and supervising had a strong sense of the show. You need to know on the recording side of the glass that the people on the other side of the glass who've been at it for months and or years in the case of some games and other shows, they are more familiar with what you're being asked to do than you are. They have the storyboard in front of them. As a rule, we don't. Anyway, I'm making a long answer out of a short question, but it was so important in the development of my career because, I was standing in the presence of people that I was thrilled to be working with. I'm not undervaluing my contributions, but it was a really tough game of jump rope, and you better be ready to jump just to keep up with what was going on. Wally would never stop until he got what he needed, but look at the result and the longevity of the result and the loyalty of the followers of that result, which was the show, and still is the franchise, certainly the G1 part of it. We got the show, and we realized sort of soon after that when it began to air that people were embracing it, that they liked this show. So we suddenly, because it was all new, being born, then we found out the numbers were good and we were picked up. So that's a whole big celebration. But you don't really understand until you start meeting fans one-to-one the impact that this show in particular has had on so many lives. And I was doing G.I. Joe at the same time. Spirit, possibility, and impossibility are states of mind. In my mind, there is only the possible, that which can be done.
Our listeners are going to love this.
So all of that was going on, but I was still kind of learning while I earned. I was watching Cullen and Arthur Burkhart and Welker and Michael Bell and everybody that I was now a colleague of and a contemporary of, even though I was relatively newer on the scene than they were. So you can't give a short answer to this question. It was a very powerful experience for me as far as the launch of what has become my career. Plus they were long sessions, and if Scatman brought his ukulele, you just wanted them to go on longer.
Right.
Well, you didn't really want them to go on longer, but it was time spent, and because there was so much time spent together, if you weren't in the scene, you were in the parking lot or the green room. So friendships were launched of people who have had very thriving careers who I'm still great friends with, and get to see at a lot of conventions and studios all over LA.
This next set of clips is from way back in November of 2014. Yoshi and I were flying solo one week, and we invited our friends John Paul Bove and Nicole on to help us host the show, not realizing that things might go a little bit differently. Wound up being about a 5-hour recording, which I somehow managed to get down to about 3.5 hours of a show. This was back when we were doing the whole show once a week, and all the comics and toys and everything. No alt mode at this time, but even so, 3.5 hours is a pretty long podcast. But you'll hear, there was just so much. we couldn't cut. There's so much good stuff we couldn't cut it out. But
there's still another show in all the outtakes from that episode. I mean, this is just a sprinkling of what was missed. But I mean, there's another episode in there for sure.
Yeah. I think we did like a special Christmas clip show that year with just the outtakes from this show. So please enjoy these clips from our good friends John Paul Bove and Nicole. We should try to get them back on in 2020, but as I've said before, never at the same time on the same show again.
Was that your idea or my idea?
I don't remember, but whoever idea it was a bad idea.
We blame you, mysterious person.
All right, please enjoy.
Hello, my name's Sir Ian McKellen. And when I'm not making films and appearing in plays and the like, I very much enjoy listening to the Transmissions podcast. I hope you do too. Oh, come along now, Charles.
The next Transformers movie starring Sir Ian McKellen as Jake Dalrymple.
Nobody cuts Jake Dalrymple up. Nobody drives him off the road. Remember to spay and neuter your pets. It's a kindness, Charles.
I'm definitely my favourite of the four of us, and I'm assuming I speak for everybody there as well. So even Yoshi, when he finally accepts his feelings and those difficult, troubling thoughts.
Just the tip right now, John Paul. Just the
tip. Yeah.
We are talking Q-tips, right?
Yes. Because obviously Q-tips are turgid. And
all right, we're moving on to toys. We're moving on to toys here. We're moving on to toys. We're talking to
guests, Charles. They're a guest.
on the subject of something 7 inches
this
tall.
This is not that kind of podcast.
What? This wasn't that kind of podcast.
This is not
one of our 4 listeners has 1/4 of a say of what we discuss on.
I'd like to say that I was not censored like this on the UK's #1 spaying and neutering podcast. I was allowed to talk about reproductive organs for almost the entire show. I don't think you should stifle people.
You were on a spade and neutering podcast. Is that pre-op or post-op? Sorry.
Well, I'd say that Spaycast is about the transition.
Okay, Charles.
Yeah.
You know that there is a large portion of our internet listening audience who just wonders how we're going to crash through the toy section. And because we're missing our main man, the Beast.
Oh, wait, I'm supposed to be Daryl. I apologize, Daryl.
All right, so let's pretend like Charles and I know something other than just comic books. You're welcome.
We were talking about spade and neutering. Are we taking those parts and using them as toys? Is that what you're saying?
I think you're going to look back at the sentence you have just said, and you will come to regret it for all the double meaning unpleasantness that is in there.
I regret very little.
Yeah.
I had that part of my brain removed.
So toys, I hear they're popular these days.
So Nicole, you've got some toys to talk to us about.
You are such a dick, Charles. You are such a fucking dick. Like, Daryl's not here. We're scared to touch toys. So let's put the F and G on it. Let's see how that goes.
I'm being gracious and letting the guests go first.
I can handle it.
Oh.
I'd like to come first. Wait,
all right,
no,
well, use both hands. Let's see where we go.
That was
See, I keep trying to get the train back on the track, and he just knock it off again. He just keep knocking it off.
They so needed a train toy. That would have been such a good segue. Where's Astro Train when you need him?
Oh yeah, he was on last week.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, okay. Well, okay, toys. Something that we all know and love, right?
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to this episode of Transmissions. But just because this episode is over doesn't mean the Transformers fun has to stop. Join us and other Transformers fans on our Discord chat server by visiting transmissionspodcast.com/discord. If you would like to learn more about how you could support the Transmissions Podcast, just visit transmissionspodcast.com/support. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you again next week.